the whole family was fun. Jack was great, Roz was great, Neil, Lisa, Barbara. I mean, it was just fun to be there because they were a great family. And they just invited everybody in, no matter who showed up. It was like, hey, come on in, let's have a barbecue, let's go swimming. It was, yeah, they were like a second family almost to a lot of people, I think, who would show up there, especially to people who were just starting out in comics who needed, you know, some guidance or something. Jack would like say, okay, you know, let me take a look at what you have.
Len and I, when we were kids, went to Jack's house and we watched him draw. I think it was in the Galactus storyline.
One of them. We watched with effort. The most astonishing natural artist I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
He projected it from his head.
It was all there.
Yeah.
It was, the whole page was there.
There was I mean, I always tell this story because it just, to this day, blows my mind. There's a famous issue of Tales of Suspense, a splash page for a Captain America story, which is Steve Rogers in an airport. He's not in costume. He's standing there with his portfolio that the shield is hidden in. And there are people walking in front of him in several layers, people walking past him and behind. He's waiting for someone to pick him up. Behind that, there's this huge panoramic window where you see planes taking off and coming in. Watch Jack draw that. He didn't lay anything out. He started drawing in the upper left-hand corner and drew that page to the bottom right.
We've seen him do...
I've never seen anything like that in my life.
We saw him do a hand in one place. Just the hand. No rough sketching. No little blue pencil. No rough...
Us. Every time we came over, he would do sketches for us. Who do you want this time? Captain America. Okay, cool. Then he put a fist.
And a foot here. And maybe a belt, maybe, you know, something. And it would connect. It would just connect. It was
when he was done.
He wouldn't, like a lot of artists, plan out the whole thing and figure out his perspective. And at the end, he would spend some time balancing his darks, his dark areas, his black areas, and tweaking little parts of the drawing. But the basic construction of the drawing just came out of nowhere.
He would just start drawing. It would be like somebody who, writing a novel, immediately went to a final draft without doing a rough draft. He'd always start, I asked him once, as a matter of fact, and he told me he always started in the middle of the story. He'd think of the middle of the story first, and then create a beginning, and then go and create an end.
You know, I say this all the time, you know, writing a comic book is very much like writing a song. It has, you have to understand all of the instruments that are going to play, when they're going to play, whether or not they're going to be loud or they're not going to be loud. You need to build a rhythm through the story, and that's why the best stories, and something, again, that Kirby just had a gift for, he knew when to make the image small, and he knew when to make the image big, and when to use a spread, and when to use splash, and all the elements that were given, you just have to know what would make the best way of telling that story.
And don't forget that at the same time while he's doing that, he's got another book he's got to do the following week. So if he was sitting there drawing the Fantastic Four, by the time he got to the last panel in the Fantastic Four page and shipped that off, he had to start the Thor panel 1. And a whole new story with all different characters. Which is why he would get confused. They would have to send him the comic books, they would have to send him Xeroxes of the artwork before it was printed just so he could remember where he was.
More often than not in comics, improperly done, whether it's in comics or it's in computer games or whatever, what you have is people who take ideas that are already there and reinvent them, or pretend to reinvent them. As often as not, they destroy the idea that went before, and they say, I can do it better, which is not a good way to do it. The idea person says, I have a new idea. And that's what Jack does.
Jack Kirby was one of the most unique artists in the history of art, not just in comic books. And everything Kirby touched was unique. And his imagination spanned so many characters, so many concepts, that they are the types of characters and concepts that keep speaking to new generations. They're not locked into a certain time, although they are of their time. Like things that are universal, Kirby's work, he was a storyteller as well as just an artist. So Kirby's stories, his characters, his visual concepts were both of their time and timeless as well. And you can only find that in very few creators in any field whose work stands the test of time, yet was of its time as well.
He got very excited when he was drawing. He put a lot of himself and a lot of his emotion into the drawing. And a lot of what he was trying to do, I believe, was to create that same kind of emotion in the reader. And that meant stretching anatomy, stretching perspective, sometimes inventing brand new rules of depth perception right in front of your very eyes.
I mean, I don't think Jack really could draw anatomy. I don't think Jack could draw a real car, you know. I don't think that wasn't Jack. He was a visceral animal and drew impressions of things.
It almost looks like happy accidents, you know. It's like he's drawing so fast that, you know, the drawing just kind of comes out a certain way. If you really look at Jack's anatomy, it doesn't make any sense. You know, the people look like, you know, robots or toys or something, because the anatomy is just, it's almost like mechanical rather than living flesh. And it's almost, it has like this weird abstract stylization on it.
If you'd sit around with artists and you talk about Jack's anatomy, you go, it would be like, you get the artist that would be critical, you know, and say, he doesn't know how to do anatomy, and then you say, but can you do the power that he can do? Can you do it? Let's just say I ask you to do it. Would you know what to do? Because wouldn't you be essentially held back by what you know, and then have to do that? And then guys would say, and they knew it because they'd examined the work.
Well, Jack drew his figures in time. The fist in the foreground is in a different time zone as the foot in the back. And I think he's the only artist I've ever observed who was able to do that. Someone who might just totally blank out the power of his work might look at something and say, that's a little out of drawing. But that wasn't the case. I mean, Jack, in the beginning, academically knew how to draw the human figure. As he evolved as an artist, he became an impressionist. Then I think he became an expressionist.
He'd had this way of like doing these rounded muscles. Then he'd do this straight line through the muscle that represented sinew. But sinew is something that's very subtle. It has slight curves and it goes like that. Jack would do this straight line and he'd do a couple of straight lines. And in your mind you go, I know what that is. That's sinew. This is muscle, this is sinew, but it's just a black line. But Jack had this shorthand method of knocking it out. And if you were to say, well, what is that? You know, he has no right to do that. And you go, well, excuse me, I can go to the museums any day and I can say this, I can see the same kind of interpretation done by people whose paintings are selling for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And you're telling me Jack Kirby can't do it? Wrong.
You know, I argue with people. I say, well, listen, this, you know, you're looking at Kirby. Kirby is on a par with Goya when Goya is doing his cartooning. And of course, you know, nobody wants to believe that because Goya's, you know, great artist and Kirby does comic books, and comic books are not, you know. But I just when the first picture of the Mole Man is unbelievable. It's so beautiful.
So me as an artist, it just overwhelms me to see that gutsy, ballsy thing, and in a way say to myself, I can't do it. I can't. I would like to be able to. I mean, I can't do it, but maybe I'd corrupt myself if I did it. Ooh, that's danger. You go, ooh, I like to ink it though. I like to do that slashing line.
I mean, all his drawing is just. It's like every human movement is exaggerated. I mean, if somebody was sitting in a chair, it would look like they were moving and they were sitting in the chair at the same time. He didn't like things being still.
A lot of us guys growing up reading Jack Kirby's comic books were so taken by his work that we decided that we wanted to become or try to become professional artists like Jack Kirby. And it's at that time when you go back and deliberately study and dissect that you understand the gift this guy had for composition. Here's a perfect example right here in this Claw comic right here. I'll give you an example of cool composition right here. This scene down here, the way Claw is poised there, that's about as extreme a pose as you can ever get. And this is an extreme pose that us kids reading these would always pick up on when looking at a Kirby comic. We just had to register it in an emotional way without ever knowing the tricks and rules that go into a formal composition or a dynamic composition. It was just there.